Hello there, dear viewer, and welcome to attaQ. My name is Jakob. I'm your host, and you're watching a attaQ episode. And in this episode, well, for a very long time, I've been looking for an audiovisual app that can do stuff the way I want to do stuff. What does that mean? Well, the closest thing I've been able to get at is something called Magic Music Visuals. And the problem with this one is that it's not available on iOS. It's only available for Windows and Mac OS. I love this app. It does everything that I want and more. You can do so much with it, and I've been able to create some stunning looking graphical elements for my videos. Now, on iOS, there's nothing quite like it until now, because not so long ago, Imaginando and Perplex On announced VS, Visual Synthesizer, and that's what it is. It doesn't produce any audio or anything like that. This is an audiovisual app that uses both audio inputs and MIDI to create interesting looking graphical visual elements. Many buzzwords there, and I'm just trying to sound smart even though I'm not very smart. Well, the thing is, this is not what I'm exactly looking for. It isn't, because it doesn't do stuff the way I want it. I want to do stuff with a timeline. I want to be able to export stuff. I want to be able to import my own shaders in here. But I do absolutely love VS, and I highly recommend it. And I want to show you how you can do some seriously good looking stuff with this thing. Now, I have talked to Imaginando, and they have mentioned that they are looking into introducing shader import in the future. And that makes me all giddy with excitement, because that means that we can import other shaders than the ones that are already in here. Because, you know, I don't want to end up having my videos look like other videos, even though what we're making today is a very popular thing that many people are using on, forget what I said. Now, the app is not perfect, and there are some issues, and they're not necessarily related to the app itself actually, but more related to hardware resources. And you'll understand more as you keep on watching. Towards the end, I really go in depth about that, and I show some solutions to a common issue that I'm having. But yeah, I hope you're gonna enjoy the show, so let's get rolling. Right, so I want to show you how you can set something like this up yourself. Now, I'll tell you right from the start that I wouldn't make such an intricate looking thing as I've got right here, right now in VS. Why? Because if you look at the FPS, we can see that it's quite low, 21, 22 frames per second. Why is the frame resolution so low? Well, we're using a bunch of shaders in here, and they take a lot from the graphics processor, and I think it takes a bit from the CPU as well. Even though my iPad Pro 11-inch iPad from 2018 is very powerful, shaders and stuff like this, graphics, can take a lot from your system. Well, with that said, I want to show you exactly how to do something like this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna close this down, and I'll just show you real quick what's going on in the background. So here we have a project inside AUM. I've got VS Visual Synthesizer loaded right here in the insert effect slot, and then I'm using buses to send audio into it. Now, the only audio really going into it is this track right here and this track right here. And this is a bass drum track, a bass drum loop, and this is a snare drum loop. On this track here, we've got the bass line, and on this track here, we have a lead sound. And I don't want to send them into VS because I'm going to use frequency splitting for the amplitude modulation in order to get what we've got going in here going. And as you can see, I've got the levels for these two buses up a bit. So I'm sending the bass drum and the snare drum into VS. So here we have VS, and the first thing we're going to do is to start from scratch. So we're going to open up the preset list, go to the factory folder, and then choose default. Here we got a nice floaty little ring, and we're gonna jump to page 1. Right down here are your layers, and you've got up to 8 layers of shaders that you can load. And right now we cannot load our own shaders externally, so if you find any shaders online on the web, then you can't use them yet. But Imaginando has told me that they're thinking of implementing it in the future, so I'm hoping that that will happen, and I'm keeping my eye out for that. Now the last one here is a picture layer for the background. And unfortunately, you can't load pictures on top of the other layers. You can only load it at the back, and I'm hoping that they will change this in the future. So let's jump to the first layer here, long press it, and then open up materials. And inside materials, I want to find that 80s retro style thing, that sun thing, and it's right down here. We press it, and here it is selected. Now we can do several things to this. We can move it in the x-axis, we can also move it in y-axis, we can change the size, and I am actually gonna minimize the size. Now we can also change the rotation for this thing, and we can also change the divisions of these lines and make them fatter, or we can make them thinner. Now I want to make them a little bit fatter like this, and I'm also going to change the speed here so that they're rotating down instead. Now the brightness is kind of, yeah, you can see what it does. And then we have an alpha channel on this. So I'm going to show you what this does when we load more layers. And so just for the demonstration, I'm going to pull the alpha all the way up. So it says 1. Now we need more layers. We want that grid. So we're going to go to box number 2, long press that, go into materials and look for the grid. And it's at the top here. So there we go. And we can't see it. Why? Well, first of all, the layer is not enabled, and you can turn layers off or on this little button here. So let's turn that on, but we still can't see it. Why? Well, if we go back to layer 1 and just pull down on the alpha, then we start seeing it. So that's what alpha does. It basically is a transparency setting. And so make sure you've got this pull down if you've got stuff underneath you want to be visible. Now, as you could see in the beginning, I had 2 grid layers. So we're going to copy this grid layer by holding and pressing copy, going to layer 3, long pressing and pasting. What we're going to do is to rotate the second layer right here until we get it on top. And this can be a little bit tricky to do because they're a bit sensitive, but there we go. Now it's right on top. Now, what's interesting with this is that we can change the speed for how these grids are moving. And so we can basically have them moving backwards if we wanted to, and we can have them moving slower or faster. And you know what? Just for this one, I think I'm going to have the top one moving backwards and the bottom one moving forwards. Now, it's looking interesting, but it's kind of boring because we're only using one color. So how do we change colors? Well, we go to the first layer right here, and then we can press this colored little button here. If we press that, we get the color blender. And if we move it around, we can see that the color is changing on the sun layer. So let's move it up to some kind of an orangey looking thing here. And then let's go to this grid and change this to like a pimping. And then we go to this one and change this to a cyan looking one, and maybe a little bit more green in this one, around there somewhere. And there we go. Press the colored button again to close the color blend down, and yeah, it's starting to look really interesting. But the only movement going on, well, are the grids. So how can we use the music we've got in our loops? And what I want to happen is I want the sun to change size on every bass drum hit. And then I want the grids to move, I want the upper layer to jump up, and I want the bottom layer to jump down on every snare hit. Now we need to open up the modulation view, and I recommend that you use this button over here. What do I mean with that? Well, I'm gonna show you. So if we press here, we've got this view right now. And if we press it again, we can see the routing matrix for all these modulation sources and where you want them to go, basically. Now, if I press it back here and I close it down on this button and then open it up again, then when opening it on this arrow, well, it will always show you the last page you were on. However, if I close this down and I long press on a knob here, then they will always send you to the matrix. Let me show you again. I'll press this until we get into this view. I'll close it down and long press on speed, and it will jump to the routing matrix instantly. This was a bit confusing for me in the beginning, so I recommend always using this button here so you know exactly where you are. So what are we doing here? Well, we've got LFOs over here, we got 4 of them, and then we've got 2 envelope generators right here we can use, and then we've got the amplitude modulation here. So if I press play here, we can see the audio coming into the amplitude modulation section. Now we want to use the kick for the sun, and we want to change the size of the sun every time the bass drum kicks. So let's jump back to the modulation matrix, and if you look closely up here, you can see 3 lines, 1, 2, and 3. And these are basically where your different sources are. So let's select the sun layer, and we need to be at the middle page where we have the size control. And then we choose to increase AM1 for the size. So now, as you can see, we're getting both the snare drum and the bass kick actually affecting the size of the sun, and we don't want that. So what do? Well, if we go to the AM modulation view by pressing here, we can select a frequency we want to listen to. We're using AM1, which is this one, and right now we're using a gated mode. If we press where it says gate, we get spectrum, and this will allow us to select a frequency to listen to. So that way we can listen to frequencies that are usually given off by bass drums. We're still not getting the correct movement because the snare drum is still bleeding into the bass frequency and our threshold is too low. As you can see, we've isolated the range for the bass drum frequencies, and we're now able to get the sun to only listen to that. Now, I think the movement is a bit jarry, so I'm going to increase the attack time and release time so we get a smoother movement. Now, the next thing we want to do is to make the grids jump. We want the upper grid to jump upwards and the lower grid to jump downwards when the snare drum hits. And so what do we need to do? Well, we need to jump to the grid layer, the first one, and this is the bottom layer. We need this to move down, and we do that with the Y controller downwards. So let's set that up first by switching over to the matrix view and going to AM2 and make sure that the Y control is moving the right way. And then let's go to this layer and make sure that it's moving upwards. Now, as you can see, we have that same problem as we had with the sun, that both the bass and the snare drum is affecting the grids and making them jump at both hits, basically, and we don't want that. So we make sure that the second AM source is selected, and then next we need to switch the mode over to spectrum so that we can isolate the higher frequencies in the snare drum. Let's move this up because I know that a lot of the snare drum is up here, and then we also need to fiddle around with the threshold. Give it a little bit of attack, give it a little bit of release, and we get a smoother movement. And now I want you to look closely at what's happening with the frame rate here. As you can see, the more shaders we add, the less frame rate we get. When we only had the sun, I forgot to tell you that, but I can probably show you. I think we had around 60 frames per second or something like that. And that's just the thing. This is why I like recording stuff in separate layers and then mixing them together in LumaFusion, using a screen blend mode to get them together to make it look really, really nice. And, you know, I really do wish that we could load our own shaders in here. So what we need to do now is to add a little bit more, because the first thing you saw in this video had some extra texture in there. It was actually like a nebula-like looking thing. And so where do we get that? Well, we jump to layer number 4, long press it, press materials, and frame rate is really going to be dropping now, but what we need is Starlight, this one right here. Press that, and now we have it, but we can't see it. Why? Well, first we have to turn it on and also make sure that all the alpha layers are pulled down so it can be visible through here. Now, here we can do loads of stuff. We can change the clouds like this, and I think it's looking nice here. The glows are basically controlling these little orb things, as you can see. So a little bit of orbs in here. We're gonna change the rotation because I like it when they're going upwards like this. And then we're gonna change the speed so it's going downwards slowly like this a little bit. Change the brightness, turn that down. Now I want you to look up here. When we added that layer, we're now down to 23, 24 frames per second. And yeah, like I said, shaders are demanding. Now there is one more thing we need to do, because right now the background is black and it would be nice if we had a bit of color in the back. So let's go to layer number 5 and activate this one, and that's not looking very good. So let's change it by going to the color selector right here. Here we get the color blend, and let's give it a bit of a bluish green color like that, and we're gonna make it darker, and there we go. And now I can press play up here and we can go to full screen mode over here. Now, through the power of video editing, I have actually changed some stuff around in here. I've added a little bit more modulation, and I have also changed some colors. So I've changed the background color to a warmish brown red, and I've also added some LFO modulation to the hue of the nebula layer, or whatever we can call it. Now I've also changed the sun, so not only does it change size when the bass drum hits, if we look down here we can see that I've also added some AM modulation to the brightness. So whenever the bass drum hits, the sun grows and also it becomes brighter. And to make that effect really work, I had to pull down on the brightness and it just looks nicer. Those are the changes I've made. And so what if you wanted to use this for a music video? You're gonna have to record it as a video because there are no export functions. VS doesn't have a timeline, and I wish it did. You know, I wish I could work with VS like with any sequencer really, but we're gonna have to make do with recording video, and you can find the button for recording video up here in the upper right corner. Before we do that, I want you to go and check something in the hamburger menu and press that open, and then go to settings. Here you can find frame rate and output resolution. Now, I've had some really weird recordings or exports, whatever you want to call it, when I've set this to 60 frames per second, which is a format I like working in. 1080p 60 frames per second is just perfect for me. That's what I work with all the time. But if I set it to 60 frames per second, then VS is running slower, and when I record videos, the videos end up being, well, when I play them back, they're much faster than they look like. So if you want to get some accurate exports or recordings, I suggest you set it to 30 frames per second and record it at that. I don't know if this is a glitch or bug, or if it's just, you know, my hardware resources not being enough to really show me what's really going on the screen. Yeah, I think it's something along those lines. So I've set it to 30 frames per second, 1080p, and all we have to do is to press record and it starts recording. Now I can press play over here. Press stop, and then if I press the recording again, we're gonna get prompted and it's gonna ask us what we want to do. Now I want to save this video to my camera roll, and if we go to the camera roll and turn all of this off, open up the camera roll and go in here, and there we are. It looks rather nice, and the frame rate, yeah, you know, it's not the best. I wish it could be better, but it looks pretty nice. And if you're using LumaFusion, you can probably add some smoothing with some bloom or some other stuff in there. All right, so here's a big issue. When I was done recording my video, when I was doing the tutorial, I tried syncing it with the music afterwards, and I couldn't make it work. Why? Well, you're working with percentages when you're slowing videos down or making them faster in LumaFusion, basically changing the playback speed. And I needed to pull it down 10% to get it close to the original BPM. So I had to slow the video down 10%, get it down to 90% of the normal speed. And the problem was I needed to go to 87 or 88 or 89, something like that. And I couldn't, because in LumaFusion it jumps from 90 to 85. So the best possible solution to this is if you stay inside VS, Visual Synthesizer. When you're playing your track and you've got the graphics going on, even though it's laggy, you can record your screen with the internal built-in screen recorder in iOS. Just swipe down from the right corner, press the screen recording, and it will record both the music and what's going on the screen. Now, this will get you closer to a synced video, but it won't be completely synced. So what you're gonna have to do at the end is you're gonna have to separate the audio from the video and pull back on the video a little bit, basically moving the audio forward or the video back, and then you will have something synced. This is not perfect, people. I just wanted to show you the process and the built-in recorder in VS and why you don't want to use that if you're working with videos the way I am when you want to make music videos. And I also want to add that this might change in the future. It might not stay like this. And as iPads and iPhones gets more powerful, well, we're gonna deal with less of these problems. I'm actually wondering how an M1 iPad would fare with something like this. I highly recommend VS Visual Synthesizer to people who want to do audio-visual stuff on iOS. It's an amazing app, and even though it is tailored for people who want to do stuff, you know, live, and it's tailored for live performances, basically, well, it is a good start, and it makes me very hopeful for the future. I hope that one of these days we could get a timeline in here and exporting functions instead, so we could get some full frame rates exports and things like that. There's a lot of stuff I want added in here, but it is a good start, and I think Imaginando has done a great job. And I do suggest that you go and check out Imaginando's other apps like LK, and also go and check out Perplex On's Instagram page, because they make some of the best looking footage when it comes to the audiovisual stuff with iOS. So Imaginando, Perplex On, thank you for this. Anyone who wants to go and check out VS for themselves, there is a link down below in the description. And before you leave, if you like this type of content, if you like what I do here on the channel, support me by giving me a thumbs up. And if you didn't like the video, give me a thumbs down. Now, if you want to support me in any other ways, you can share my videos, of course. And if you want to support me in a financial way, go and check out my music. There's a full list of links down below. And yeah, I've got not loads of music, but more music coming out of the type that you've been hearing here. So yeah, that's gonna be good. Now, if you don't want to go and check out my music, you can check out my Patreon, and I've also got PayPal. And if you don't want to do any of that, then that's okay too. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it. You cannot hide it all. I'll break that firewall.
Warning.
I'm coming for you.